I was lucky to be born into a normal family. Unfortunately, my mother had a difficult birth, and after I was born, she could no longer have more children. So she gave me all her tenderness. I grew up as a happy child, surrounded by the love of my parents. But my parents' love was not fanatical. They understood that I could grow up to become a complete spoiled egocentric, not being adapted to the realities of life. There were many examples of this around us, and my parents did everything they could to teach me to live independently in the world around me. My mother enrolled me in various sections and clubs in which I did not stay for long, but in 7th grade at a pioneer camp I heard the guitar and fell in love with the instrument in the fall. I asked my mom to enroll me in a music studio, where I was taught to play the guitar. My mom, remembering my lessons in previous clubs and sections, was skeptical of my request, but finally enrolled me in classes and paid for me a 6-month course. After high school, I joined the Army, thinking that military training would be useful to me in life. After serving my time, I came home as a sergeant major. A girl was waiting for me in my hometown. I honestly did not expect her to wait for me and not marry a rich man, but she waited for me. I took a break from military service for almost a month, and then got a job in a machine tool factory as a lathe operator. At the same time, I enrolled in the Polytechnic University as a part-time student. I decided to become a mechanical engineer because I had an attraction to technology. And of course, I married the girl I loved on December 6th. We got married, and in September, Michelle gave birth to a son. We called Edgar, just like me. Mishi had an exotic name. My beloved wife, a year after the wedding, she was finishing her studies at a construction college and was planning to enter a specialized university. I had a wife with clear goals. We lived on an average income. We did not live in poverty or luxury. I worked in the factory, and at night I played in a restaurant, supplementing the family budget with additional income. I helped Mishi with the baby as much as I could at night. I got up to feed the baby, sometimes heating the food in hot water. I fell asleep with my head resting on the dining room table. Over time, my son grew up and my Che prepared for exams in August. He left for the capital. A week later, I already knew that I had passed the entrance exams and had been accepted into the university, and I decided to abandon my studies to give my wife the opportunity to study. While Michelle immersed herself in her studies, I washed diapers, took my son to clinics, and did what mothers normally do. I deliberately gave up my career to allow Michelle to pursue her dream of becoming a civil engineer. Finally, my wife got her diploma and returned to her hometown. My son had 6 years old at the time, and we were preparing for school. Michi found a job at a design firm, which soon became a successful construction firm. In fact, Michelle was a capable, if not talented, engineer. 5 years later, she was appointed deputy director of capital construction, and a few years later, she became vice president of the company and owner of 30% of the shares. My wife went from being a simple girl to becoming a successful businesswoman. I continued working as a lathe operator and occasionally played in the restaurant at night, trying, unsuccessfully, to realize my unfulfilled dream of being a musician. The years passed at the speed of an express train. The time came when Edward graduated from high school and was preparing to go to college. He decided to become like me. Once a mechanical engineer, my wife ran her company with a firm hand and was firmly established on the board of directors. She also tried to lead the family lately. Michi advised me at all times to change occupation, clearly implying that she was not satisfied with life with a simple lathe operator. A man who was not in her social circle at some point strongly suggested that I work in his company, but I categorically refused to change anything in my life. I was satisfied with everything at work. I was appreciated as an excellent specialist. The night music warmed my soul. My son and his successes were a joy for me. I must say that my son and I were very close. He shared all his secrets and mysteries with me. I was the first to know that he had a girlfriend, and that their relationship became a great love. The girl was very pretty, with only one defect. She came from an orphanage when Michi found out there was a scandal at home. "It is your fault you pamper Edward and everything." "What a girl, that rabble of you." "No rabble, my son deserves better than that. My friends have wonderful daughters to marry with our Eder. Or do you want him to be a common worker like you?" Before these words, I got up and left the room in silence and told my son, "Think for yourself. You are an adult, and this is your life. Whatever you decide, I will support you several times. I accompanied my wife to social events, but I did not know anyone there, and I caught looks of contempt and astonishment from well-groomed men and women. It was not my circle, I had nothing in common with them. Michelle noticed it and stopped dragging me by. Then we had moved to a country house, but soon Edward left for the capital and our house was empty. My wife and I were left alone. I was already 46 years old and Mishi a year younger. His 45th birthday, he decided to celebrate it in style. He rented the best restaurant in the city for an entire night and invited guests from his circle. My wife and I were at the entrance of the banquet hall receiving the guests. Or rather, she received them. And I only collected the gifts and gave them to her assistants. I saw him immediately. He was a young man with a strict cream that fit well with his athletic figure. His tanned face was perfectly highlighted by his blonde hair. Elegant perfume and a haughty and sarcastic look, he was towards me. He looked at Maishi with love. He held her hand while giving a congratulatory speech, looking her straight in the eyes. Then he kissed her fingers and gently squeezed her palm. Then he turned to me, imposing me. "You have a lovely wife, take care of her." He nodded carelessly and left with the other guests. I looked at my wife. Her eyes shone with happiness, seeing my somewhat perplexed look. She deigned to explain to me. "He is our client, Edward Chomsky. We are building a residential complex for him with that." He was very far from me in his thoughts all night. Mishi fluttered between the admirers. Chuni didn't leave her side either. They chatted pleasantly, danced. They talked to the guests. It seemed to me that my Michelle had forgotten she had a husband. She could hardly wait for the celebration to end from my corner. I saw Mishi say goodbye warmly to Chomsky as he headed for the exit. It was then that I realized that I was losing my wife. You can't fool the heart. There was more to their relationship than a simple client and contractor relationship. A month after my wife's birthday, I was returning home from work. A larger black car hovered in front of our house, and a man and a woman were kissing passionately. She had her arms around his neck and seemed to have her lips inside his mouth. You know, I wasn't at all surprised when I recognized the woman as my wife. The lucky gallant was, of course, Mr. Chomsky. Suddenly Michi saw me. He abruptly pulled away from his lover-eater. "It's you." He reached out his hand in disappointment. I took his hand. "Michi, let's go home." "I tried to take my wife, friend. Don't you see that she doesn't want to go with you?" said Chuni in a dismissive and mocking tone. 2 bodyguards appeared behind him. "Leave the woman and get out of here." His tone became threatening. Mishi was silent, and don't forget that this is my wife. I tried to control my emotions as best I could, but Chuni's bodyguards were already approaching me from 2 sides, and I exploded. I let go of Miel's hand. I turned and kicked one of the thugs in the kneecap with my right foot, knocking down at the same time. The heavy figure fell to the pavement with a crash. I turned abruptly towards the second one, and taking a step to the left, I hit him in the nasal septum with my right hand. The bodyguard flew sideways, hitting his head against the body of the car out of the corner of my eye. I saw the driver trying to get out from the car with a baseball bat. I kicked the door, and the brave man slumped in the seat, holding his broken nose with his hand. It all happened so fast that the sweet couple didn't notice anything. Chuni stared at me with his mouth open, terrified, waiting for me to go for him. Maishi clung to his sleeve with both hands. "Edward, go home. I'll be there in a moment." His voice was shaking with emotion. "Don't make a massacre." I turned around and entered the house. I went to the kitchen and tried to pour myself some vodka. My hands were shaking so much that I had to drink from the neck of the bottle. Michelle appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk, of course." "Ed, I met a man. He was silent, gathering his thoughts, and I have fallen in love with him. We have been together 6 months. I don't want to deceive you anymore. I'm leaving with him. I will explain everything to our son. I think I deserve a little happiness. Feminine, you are good, but you have stagnated. You have no prospects with yourself. Frankly, I'm bored. We've gotten over our marriage. Our relationship went silent again, waiting for my reaction, but I remained obstinately silent. I want to be with my friend, was a successful man, a man with whom I have common interests, a man." I interrupted his emotional monologue. "Don't waste words. It's clear. Go ahead. That's all. You won't tell me anything else. Mishi, I was clearly disappointed. What am I supposed to say? Advice and love. I looked at the bottle. Wait, I'm going to go. Now you can live here. This is your place too, in short. Mishi kept talking and talking. We can stay on good terms. We've been together a quarter of a century. We're not strangers. I looked at the half-finished bottle with regret and left the house without saying anything. It was impossible to hold on to Michelle, and it didn't make sense. They say you have to fight for love. Love either exists or it doesn't exist. Everything. The rest is pure sentimentality. It's a shame, the wasted years. Although I didn't get drunk. I didn't fall into a stupor. There was only one feeling in my heart: resentment. I really didn't understand. How could I leave someone I had lived with for so long? Why I was clear that I didn't. I was on their level with my education, my manners, my flaunting. I didn't even have a college education. Kill myself for the past. What was the point? There was no turning back, and what was the point? It was easier to cut that period of my life and try to start over. 46 years is not a sentence. I spent the night at my parents' house. I didn't tell them much about my misfortune, and they didn't ask too much. My mother, of course, was upset, but it didn't bother me. I barely slept that night. I smoked out the window, inhaling the cigarette smoke diluted with cold air with pleasure, and I gathered my thoughts in the morning. Edward called me. "Dad, you're divorced." His voice sounded anxious. "What are you getting drunk?" "Dad, you're not a child. Talk to Mom. Apologize. At least she'll forgive you." "She loves you, Edward. It's more complicated than that. It's not about me. She found someone else." There was so much pain and disappointment in her voice that I shuddered inside. "She's still your mother no matter what. What's up? She loves you. All that happened was about our relationship." I try to reassure my son the best I can. "We are a you and me all. What concerns you concerns me. I grew up in your arms and I won't leave you for this." Edward didn't end, choking with rage. "Dad, don't worry. She's not worth it. I'll be there soon." Then Michelle called Ed. "What's with all those whims? You're an adult. You have to accept life as it is. Why should we fight?" She started in her mentor tone. "Why did you leave? This too is your house. I didn't kick you out. I passed out." It was unbearable to listen to her. Michelle called over and over. Finally, I turned off the phone. 2 days later, some came. "Dad, I was at Mom's house. I tried to talk to her, but she called. This is him. He said he had no secrets from the man he loved. That's what he said. Love her. How is that? Why is he doing this to us?" She fell silent, tears rolling down her eyes. Her boyfriend. He kept smiling smugly, and then hugged her. I was open from emotion. I don't have a mother anymore. I hate that I didn't try to change my mind. What to decide on my own. 2 months later. We divorced months later. Michelle married Mr. Chomsky tried to contact Edward, but he didn't answer her calls. The wedding was a big event. It was held in the most luxurious restaurant in the city. Mr. Chooney got a big trophy, a sea of guests, popular pop singers, all high society was at this wedding, except they say the mother of the bride cried the whole time and went home early, taking her father, and the son refused to come. Although Mishi did everything she could to make him be there. Even Chomsky himself came to see Edgar, asking for the support of his mother in the afternoon of that day. When the wedding was resonating, he walked down the avenue of an old and abandoned park. It was darkening the cold wind from the north. He tried to tear off the yellow leaves that clung to the wet asphalt. The streetlights were on. I walked calmly down the sidewalk, soaked by a fine rain, betraying my shadow like a relay from one streetlight to another. I felt nauseous. I was disgusted to have lived so long with a deceitful woman. Surprisingly, I was calm. I felt no despair or regret. I had received a good vaccine of family life, but I could not predict how things would develop things. I constantly wondered how to live. 46 years is not old, yet I had decided what I was going to do. But I knew for sure that I had to change my life. It is difficult to live freely. During the years of my marriage, I got used to my wife solving almost all the global issues of my life. It was easier that way and differently. I went with the flow, and finally I immersed myself in her. Now my wife is letting herself be carried away by life with another person I loved. Michelle, yes, I did, and worst of all, I continue to do so despite all my bragging. But the train has already passed. She is someone else's wife, or luckier and richer, at least. That's his equal, as he said. Last time we saw each other, there's so much to talk about, of course. I missed Maishi. His eyes, his hands, his body. Finally, we had a love. Crazy until the last crazy moment I writhed for 6 months. There had been a third man invisibly present in her marital bed. She spent the night with me just making love because she loved another, and thought about her Chomsky kissed her. After my lover unwittingly erased the traces of their love, I can innar how they laughed at me, how disgusting it all was. And after all that she offered to remain friends at the beginning of winter, my son called, "Dad, I'm getting married." My son's voice vibrated with joy. With Natasha. New Natasha, that girl from the orphanage. Congratulations. I'm glad you made a decision. I stayed silent, waiting for the rest of the story. Dad, we are inviting you to the wedding only. We will have the people closest to me, a few friends, and you. Natasha Ramey wants to meet you. The wedding is on December 6th. Thanks, Edgar. I will try to be there. I was happy for my son. I just wanted everything to go well for him, Dad. Edgar spoke again after a brief pause. Your ex won't be here. Not even I told her I don't want to see her. My son stubbornly refused to call Mother Edgar. She loves you after all. She is your mother. I tried to talk sense to my son. What does our fight have to do with her, Dad? We have already discussed this. Let's not talk about sad things. Come, Natasha and I are waiting for you. My son turned off his phone. The phone kept ringing and ringing. The person on the other end seemed to know perfectly that I was home and was waiting patiently for me to answer. Hey, I whispered in a sleepy voice. Ed said, a pleasant female voice, I'm calling on behalf of Inga. She said it in such a way that upon hearing that name I had to shudder with happiness. In fact, the name meant nothing to me. There was a pause on the phone. I was about to hang up when the woman continued. Could it be at the Solid Bank at 12? I looked at the alarm clock. The hands showed 12:20. I couldn't. Why not? The woman was childishly surprised because I don't understand why I need it. I'm not going to ask for a loan at your bank. The name of Inga doesn't mean anything to me. By the way, you haven't introduced yourself either. I'm sorry, I'm John, Inga's secretary. She wants to talk to you about a job. I was surprised I already have a job. Edward, a visit to the bank doesn't oblige you to anything. The car will bring you and take you. It depends on you anyway. The voice of Shane was enveloping, and maybe this is the beginning of a new life. I wonder what she wants to offer me. This Inga, well, not the position of manager. Jin turned out to be a young blonde girl with an incredibly short skirt. I even stared at her shapely legs and the flesh-colored things for a while. Hi, Edgar. His eyes were shining with genuine happiness when he saw me come. Inga, I was waiting for you. He opened before me a solid oak door with a manager sign in an office furnished in high-tech style. There was a desk at which sat a young woman of about 40 years old in a dark green suit. When she saw me, she smiled, fixing a lock of white hair that fell on her forehead. Hi, Edgar, come in and sit down. Tea, coffee? Thanks. I just had breakfast. I pretended to be an idiot on purpose to annoy the owner of the office. Well, as you wish. She did not feel at all embarrassed by my answer. Before we get into the matter, I want you to see a small movie. He pressed a button on his computer and a black and white movie played on a large screen hanging on the left wall. The screen showed images of me crushing Mr. Chooney's guards on the asphalt. I looked inquisitively to the banker. This is from the camera in front of your house. I am a friend of your neighbor, and she kindly provided me with this material. As I understand, Mr. Choonan has not filed any charges against you. How banal, he is trying to blackmail me. That was the first thing that came to my mind. Inga smiled. Mr. Seg-Gorsky, I did not call you here to blackmail. I want to offer you a job. It was as if she read my mind. I stayed silent. A job as my bodyguard. I am going through a difficult time, and I need a reliable man by my side. She smiled, tired, judging by this film. She nodded towards the screen. You can handle it, and what makes you think I am reliable? I made some inquiries about you. Besides, I know your ex-wife, Michi Soraya, a little now. Mrs. Chomsky, the banker. She took a thin blue folder in her hands. It was she who recommended me to you. I began to boil. That is not enough to be the protected of a society girl. Absolutely. No, I don't need nobody's recommendation. The one in the office got up. I'm not rushing you. Think about it until tomorrow. Now, if you decide, call me. She pushed the card with her index finger and it slid across the perfectly smooth surface in my direction. I kept my gaze fixed on the woman in admiration. Yes, a suit. And you could have worn a longer skirt in the morning. I dialed a simple number. Yes, a familiar voice answered. I agree. When should I start? Immediately. The car is already outside your house. The banker fainted. I looked out the window. There was a big black Lexus with tinted windows in front of the entrance. So I became Inga Herber's personal bodyguard, the manager of the solid bank. I quit my old job. My bosses didn't want to let me go. There are many engineers, but good turners can be counted on the fingers of one hand, but I insisted. And in the end, even I was fired at my own request. But when I was fired, they told me that if I changed my mind, they would be happy to rehire me. I also attended my son's wedding. Everything was very modesto. A few friends of Natasha and Edward and I sat in a cafe, lived a little, and around 10 p.m. we left. Everything went well, except for a small incident when the night was coming to an end. A young man, well-dressed and unknown, approached our table. Edward Zori addressed my son with courtesy. Mrs. Chumskaya congratulated him on his wedding. The man handed Edward an envelope. The guests sitting at our table were silent. My son was the first to break the silence. Please tell Mrs. Chumskaya that I do not accept gifts from strangers. Edward looked at me. The man stayed for a moment holding the envelope in his hands, then nodded his head, put the unaccepted gift in the inside pocket of his jacket, and left for a moment. I thought I saw Michelle's figure at the back of the room. My heart beat faster. I wondered if I still felt something for her, wishing them happiness to the young. I went to house that same night. I was only given 1 day off and had to go to work the next day. To be honest, I had a vague idea about my future job. I told this honestly to the head of the security service at the bank. But he patted me on the shoulder and told me that my duties were not so much as a bodyguard, but more as a companion to Miss Gerbert. I would only have to be with her all the time and accompany her to work and informal meetings. Her physical security would be handled by other specially trained people. He gave me a plastic pass card and a Glock 18 pistol with a laminated port permit in my name before starting my duties. I went to the narcology and psychiatry dispensaries, where I obtained certificates that I was not crazy nor an alcoholic when I gave them to the head of the security service. He smiled. I did not doubt it, but the rules are. The rules. The boss put the car keys in front of me. You will have to live in Inga's house. Stay there the 24 hours a day. Accompany her to work, and wherever she tells you. The boss stood up and held out his hand to me. Good luck. The night before my first day of work, I went to the barbershop, shaved, and laid out my clothes in the morning. I got up early, put on black jeans, a white shirt, and a loose black tweed jacket, so the holster under my arm couldn't be seen. I put on my shoes. I was fine. I lived in a friend's apartment who had gone abroad for 6 months, but he would be back in a week. So living in Inga's house suited me well. I got into a black Lexus, drove to the intersection of the avenue and the street that leads to the elite Cabin Grove, the same one where I once lived with Michelle. The intersection offered a stunning view of the old pine-covered city park. But I looked with the snow-covered pines. I turned right and headed to the bank manager's house. Half an hour afterwards, I was there. The door was open. I drove to the house, parked the car, and went out. I approached a 2-story mansion, lost in the depths of an ancient park. Being careful not to slip, I climbed the steps covered in frost. It was quite early, and the janitor had not yet had time to clean them and sprinkle them with sand and salt. I rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and a tall and sleepy young blonde appeared in the entrance. A luxurious golden blonde mane fell in waves over her shoulders. Her slender waist, wide hips, and long legs completed a landscape from which it was impossible to look away. Her penetrating blue eyes put me in a state of semi-unconsciousness. The pause lengthened, and the blonde was the first to speak. To whom she is looking for? She asked reluctantly, bringing her hand to her mouth, trying to hide a yawn. Good morning. I am here to see Inga is selling something. The maid looked me in the eyes with challenge. Excuse me. I was too busy looking at her. Your curiosity is satisfied, more or less. I'm delighted. I took out of the BI, looked at him in disbelief. There was no need to get so excited. I smiled as charmingly as possible. I was Inga at home. Yes, she took me to the living room. Wait. I will let the lady know that you are coming. How did she say her name was? Ski. Edward Segor. Ski Valentina introduced herself and left the room, swaying her hips. Valentina came back a few minutes later. Her lady is waiting for her. She took me to the door. I turned the knob and entered a long, narrow, dark room with heavily curtained windows. Inga was in the middle of the room, and she didn't even look at me, frozen in tension. She looked out the only window that didn't have curtains. I waited a while, getting used to the darkness. The woman turned to me. "Hello, Edgar." She spoke in a low, hoarse voice. "Are you ready to start your job?" "Yes." I looked at the lady. "Have you been warned that you will live here?" He seemed not to hear my answer. "You have no objections." "No objections. Will you show me my room?" "Yes, of course. Valentina. Accompany." Edgar, the room that was assigned to me was on the second floor, a quite spacious room that contained a large oak table, a large comfortable leather armchair, and a large bed. Against the wall opposite the table was a fireplace over which hung 2 antique weapons. On the table was a statue of a knight and several books. Valentina was standing at the door watching me closely. "If you need anything, just let me know. Breakfast will be in 15 minutes. Valentina did her best to hide her curiosity for now. "Everything is fine. Thank you. Can you show me where the dining room is?" I smiled lightly and looked at the maid. Valentina blushed. "Follow me." She turned without waiting for my answer and began to walk down the stairs, lifting her short skirt. "You did everything possible to make me fight with my son." Michi blushed with anger. "Not yet. You understand that he is also my son. Calm down and do not shout." I tried to contain my emotions. Michi somehow found my address and showed up at my door late last night, clearly with the intention of causing a scandal. I was not eager to argue with her and did not even want to open the door, but then I thought that her screams would wake up the whole house. "Michi, let's talk business. What do you want from me to reconcile you with the son, but that is your business?" I did not say anything to Edward. "You were the one who showed your lover allowing him to touch you. What do you want from me now?" I spoke calmly, trying not to raise my voice. But not only did he not invite me to the wedding, and refused to accept a gift. It seemed to me that my Che was about to cry in front of me in a dazzling evening dress and a stunning fur coat. "You were a well-groomed young woman who was once my wife. And what are these tricks? You reject the job that I offered you in my company. But wanting you to accept it, you took it. You had something with her. She is your lover. Don't let me see her. I will tear her hair." Michi no longer controlled her emotions. "Michi, haven't you forgotten that it was you who cheated on me for 6 months with Champsky? That it was you who left me cold-bloodedly and went with her lover? That it was you who looked indifferent when her thugs tried to beat me? You are not the one who can claim me." I looked her straight in the eyes. "As for your son, he decides for himself. He is a grown man and decides who he wants to be with. Now go, I have to work tomorrow." It seemed to me that when Michi left, she tried to hide her guilty look. My work was not hard at all in the morning. I took my lover to the bank's main office at lunchtime. I followed her to the cafeteria. I waited for her to drink coffee and gossip with her friends sitting at a nearby table pretending to read a magazine. Then we went back to her office, and she practically had the rest of the day free, in the afternoon. I picked up a Inga, and I took her home. At first, I was looked at with interest by friends of the hostess, but she seemed to quickly explain to them that I was nothing more than a piece of furniture, and the ladies stopped paying attention to me. When I came home, the hostess would have dinner and go to her room, and I would sit in my room all night watching television and playing the guitar. In silence, work was like heaven on earth. Taking advantage of my free time, I went to the university and found out about my readmission. It turned out that the dean of the Faculty of Mechanics was an old acquaintance of mine at the time we served together in the army, and later we met at work. The dean promised to help. After 2 days, he called me and told me that I could be readmitted to the 5th year of the Correspondence Studies department. It was only necessary to pass the exams of the subjects that I had studied at the time, but had not qualified. A colleague helped me again, and soon I got my credits and a correspondence student card. Everything seemed fine. But at the end of the first month, I was so bored I was about to quit my job in the morning on my way to the office. I was about to open my mouth to give a monologue about my firing when Inga tapped me on the shoulder. "Edward, you have a decent suit." "Unfortunately, no. Somehow I never had to buy one. I had nowhere to go in the rearview mirror." I saw her raise her eyebrows in surprise. "It's strange that you and your wife didn't go to parties." My ex-wife, I underlined the word. Ex was fine without my involvement. Plus, in the last few months of our marriage, she had someone to attend those events with. The hostess was silent for a moment, as if deciding what to do next. "Let's go to the store and we'll find you something. I need to buy you some clothes." She was silent for a moment. The Princess Boutique was not far from the bank. As soon as we entered, a young saleswoman came running up to us and, "Inga, it's nice to see you. Do you want something for yourself?" she said sweetly. "There are some new arrivals for next time, Lair." "I need to find something for a young." Inga took me by the arm, showing the saleswoman our special relationship. The saleswoman Lair nodded understandingly. "There are some elegant models. I will bring them in a minute after a while." Lair and her assistant brought several men's suits. "I would recommend this one." She handed me a black suit with a slight shine. "The fitting room is over here. Vika, take it there." I was forced to follow Vika into a small fitting room. When I put on the suit, there was a knock on the door. "Here are shoes, white shirt and tie." I took off the jacket over the shirt and tried on the shirt. The clothes fit me perfectly. I looked in the mirror. A middle-aged man looked at me with signs of misery on his face, a sweet comfort for old ladies. That's all. I wonder if she will buy me things too. Inga also approved my choice when Lair pronounced the price. I almost fainted, but Ingan didn't flinch different. She handed over her card. She finished her free coffee and, gently swinging her hips, she headed to the exit. I went out after her, holding the bags in my hands. "A new boyfriend?" "Only old," said a female voice behind me. "No way. It suits him perfectly," with a hint of envy answered the other. I didn't have time to listen to the rest because of the loud bang of the door as I drove to the office. She was wondering about I needed a suit. I was probably going to a social event and would drag me with her when we got to the office. "Inga asked me to come in today. I'm invited to the opening of the art gallery. All the royalty of the city will be there. You can't refuse. You will be my escort. We must be there at 7 in the evening. My hostess instructed me in a business tone. Don't forget to change." She directed her attention to her laptop, and I noticed the audience was over. I helped Inga out of the car. I handed the keys to the ballet, and holding the lady by the elbow, I headed towards the entrance of the gallery. Inga, she was right. All the high society of the city had gathered here today. The gentlemen and husbands had brought their beauties for a stroll and proudly showed them to the society. Wives and mistresses displayed on their necks and wrists jewels worth many, many thousands of dollars. All this flock chewed and drank. The heads paraded slowly through the room, pretending to be interested in the multicolored masks hanging on the walls. Inga and I harmoniously integrated into the landscape and began to float slowly in a large circle. "Edward, bring me some champagne." Inga looked at the entrance without taking my eyes off it. I also turned my head. There was something to see. A colorful couple was entering the room, and the woman was so perfect. But her companion, a tall, middle-aged man dressed in an elegant cream suit, almost my age, a tanned face with piercing blue eyes. It was evident that the man painfully tolerated this unattractive companion. Well, the companion shone, with diamonds and dazzling white teeth that they reminded me of an obsessive toothpaste commercial. Inga, without taking her eyes off the brilliant couple, mechanically took the glass of champagne that I handed her. For a moment, I saw that the playboy's eyes stopped on her. He smiled widely, and then the accompanying son walked towards us. "Hello, dear," gracefully lengthening his vowels, he said, kissing Inga's hands. "For centuries, I have known Irina, my friend, the friend with white teeth." He smiled and slightly bowed his head. "Introduce me to your interlocutor." Ing did not consider that necessary. Yes, I was not particularly concerned about this. I was interested in other characters in the whirlwind of people. I saw Mishi on the arm of Mr. Chomsky. They were talking about something. stopping from time to time in front of the pictures hanging on the walls. But it was immediately noticeable that only Maishi was interested in that mess. Mr. Chomsky did not care at all, judging by her gloomy and bored face wanted to leave as soon as possible. Yes, Maishi has no luck with the interlocutors. She was still talking emotionally with her husband when she saw me. She even stopped talking her partner. He didn't notice anything, and silently looked at the wall. Mikey instantly saw Inga. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at her supposed rival. I even thought she was going to kill the unsuspecting Inga with her gaze. I was curious for a moment if they were to meet them one by one, who would win. I pretended not to notice the eloquent look of my ex, and looked indifferently at the opposite wall when Michelle's voice sounded right in my ear. "Hello, honey. Long time no see. What a wonderful dress, it highlights your figure so much. Hello, honey, how good to see you." Inga had nothing to envy Maishi in terms of her Pharisaism, the ladies. They kissed, touching each other's cheeks. "Oh, and you." Here the first one murmured indifferently. "Imagine I almost never managed to convince him to come to these events, Mishi." He nodded at me even under threat of death. She laughed with pretension. "Darling, you just didn't know how to use it." Inga's answer sounded more than ambiguous. "Well, don't interrupt you, Michelle." She took her treasure under her arm and dragged it towards the buffet. I knew my ex-wife well after a quarter of a century, and I could see that she was shaking with rage. Inga continued her conversation of men. It was obvious to everyone that she was reproaching her for something. Her face reddened with anger, and at one point she slapped him in the face. We were standing behind a column, so no one in the audience noticed how the playboy's face twisted with anger. He had already raised his hand to return the slap to Inga, but I managed to intercept him. "Calm down and go away." I clenched my teeth in a threatening tone. The man tried to pull his arm out of my grip, but it wasn't very skilled at it. I stepped forward and closed my grip on Inga. "You are stupid." She spoke softly behind me. "We will meet again, darling." The man let go of her arm and grabbed his diamond partner, who did not understand anything, and ran out the door. Tears filled Inga's eyes. "Edward, bring me some cognac," he whispered. "Go, we do not want to drown in sorrow." I did not ask what it was about. It was none of my business. At the end of the night, Inga was very drunk. I threw a fur coat on her and gently held her hand as I guided her towards the exit. Her heel broke on the stairs and literally fell into my arms. I carefully carried her to the car and put her in the back seat. On the way home, I thought an unknown car was following us. The light in the hallway was on, and there was no one in the house. I leaned Inga's body against the wall and closed the front door. Then I carried her in my arms to the bedroom. I was on the second floor. There was a bed under a white canopy and a box of truffles filled with feminine trinkets like elephants and kittens. The dim light and the subtle aroma of the band, all this inspired madness. I helped her to go to the bathroom, and then I gently laid her down on the bed and covered her with the blankets. I did not turn off the light at night. I was just heading towards the door when I heard her voice. "Don't go." I sat back down on the wide bed. Inga turned to me and said, "Hug me." She pressed herself against my shoulder. I shook my head, pushing away the voluptuous thoughts. Yes, dreaming costs nothing. After a few minutes, Inga Soyos. I carefully removed her hand and turned on my back like that. I fell half asleep during the night when I was sure that my lover was fast asleep. I carefully turned off the nightlight and quietly left the bedroom. I did not need any more adventures back in my room. I turned on the kettle and I made coffee. Then I took my guitar and played the blues. Slowly, it was Saturday morning. I went down to the kitchen and cooked the dough. Aunt made me bread cakes with honey. I was already eating the second portion. When was it worth it? The maid called me to see the hostess. Inga was sick. Red, swollen eyes, hands hidden under a wool scarf. "You put me to bed?" she asked, avoiding looking me in the eyes. "Yes," I answered, putting a silly expression on my face. I blinked as many times as I could and undressed. "Yes, but don't worry. I didn't steal anything. All the clothes were there." Inga choked on her tea. It was obvious that she was afraid to ask the next question. I decided to go to her rescue. "You went to bed and kicked me out. That's all, and nothing more. Nothing what was supposed to happen. You fell asleep right away and left." I couldn't in her eyes. if there was more relief or disappointment. I want to go to the cabin at home today. It's out of town near the Binsa forest. I'm ready alone on the road. Refuel oars. I left the dining room and went to prepare the car. As we left, I saw the maid talking to someone on the phone. We approached the one-story pine log house when the dust, the humidity, the smell of the untreated pine boards used to cover the walls. All that hit me in the nose is opening the heavy front door. I tried to turn on the lights, but the switch didn't work first. I had to turn on the circuit breaker in the basement, breathing down my neck in, I muttered. I come here quite rarely, and when I leave I always turn off the electricity. I'm afraid of a short. I noticed it was much colder in the house than outside. I'll go down to the basement to turn on the switch. I took a dust-covered flashlight from a coat rack and opened the creaky basement door and began to descend carefully, illuminating the dimly lit lantern under her feet. Meanwhile, she turned on the fireplace and looked for something to drink. The light came on. Inga found and turned on the switch. I looked around. The room seemed to be a living room. There were 2 wicker armchairs by the fireplace a little closer to the window. There was an oak table over the fireplace. A large black and white photograph hung on it. There was a group of young people hugging each other. They looked at the lens, and they were laughing. In the very center was a girl who looked a lot like Inga beside her. Hugging her by the shoulders was a cheerful guy, the playboy I had seen at the opening of the solo gallery, who, much younger Inga in the photo, reminded me of someone else I had seen before, but whom I lit a fire in the fireplace in the small living room, rummaging in the old cupboard. I found a full bottle of cognac and a couple of clean glasses. So you're getting used to it. Inga came in so quietly that I even shuddered hearing her voice. Somehow I quickly got used to the silence of the house and the idea that we were alone in the neighborhood, and I already felt like a hunter lost in the woods. It was quite dark from the kitchen window. We could see the tall pines and the shore of the frozen lake. I could see that the wind had risen over the lake. It was so quiet that you could hear the heartbeat. Beautiful place. No, Inga. He approached me in silence once again. Pour me a cognac. We returned to the living room. There is a radio. I wanted something to relieve my sudden melancholy. Inga walked over to the radio on a small table and turned on the speaker switch. The melody of a French sentimental hit from the 60s came on. I poured myself and Inga a drink and sat down in the wicker chair in front of the fireplace with the glass in my hand. I had no thoughts. I just wanted to sit and look at the fire in the company of a beautiful and, most importantly, not sticky woman. Inga sat down in front of me and was silent, also looking at the fire. The old music took me back to my memories, and unwillingly I remembered a winter night with Michelle on New Year's Eve. I even shook my head. Remembering her image, she was no longer the champion of my inner world. The logs in the fireplace burned and disintegrated into smoldering embers. The wind rose and shook the blinds and the windows. The howling in the chimney made me feel uneasy. I could see that Inga was shaking. Suddenly I heard a thud in the house. I froze. What was that? Was the front door slamming shut? Someone had broken into the house. Stunned, Inga and I sat in the chairs by the unlit fireplace and listened to the darkness of the night outside the windows. It was a night when a real storm was roaring. I got up cautiously, took the poker from the stand, and approached the hallway door. I slammed the door open. The key was in the lock of the front door. I closed it myself. I turned the knob. It was locked. There was another knock coming from the kitchen. I cautiously opened the kitchen door with the poker and looked inside. It was empty. There were 2 more knocks, and then I saw that a window had been blown open by the force of the wind, and I was banging against the frame. I lived to see him, startled by a kind of insignificance so common in horror movies. I struggled to close the window that was resisting due to the wind, and I returned to the living room while holding the poker in my hand. I suddenly remembered that I had a gun and a holster under my arm. The thought made me feel completely ashamed. Thank goodness Inga didn't see my face at that moment. If we don't add more wood, the fireplace will soon go out. Inga shivered. I don't want to go anywhere in this weather. Maybe you could go get some firewood. It's stacked near the boathouse. The idea of staying here all night didn't excite me much, even in the company of a beautiful woman. But there was no other option. I put on my jacket and went outside. I cautiously went down the icy steps made of wild stone to the shed. The shed was a solid structure, with deer antlers on the pediment next to the wall under a canopy that was an extension of the roof. The firewood was stacked carefully. I had already placed the second log on my left arm. Bent over, when I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly, but I had no time to dodge the blow to the head that left me stunned. Then everything swirled and I fell to the ground. I woke up feeling that I was being dragged with arms around my armpits. Whoever was dragging me was breathing heavily in the back of my head. It was heavy because of his voice. I knew it was a man, and that he was talking about me as if through a veil. I realized that he wanted to kill me. My reaction was purely instinctive. With a sudden movement, I turned around and grabbed my opponent. He stepped back surprised and fell on his back. I pounced on him, trying to grab him by the throat, but the stranger quickly recovered and punched me in the head, right where they had hit me before I screamed in pain. But my hands grabbed even tighter to my opponent. The man beneath me resounded, and with an effort he managed to lift a leg and flip. We rolled towards the lake and fell in. The water that had not yet frozen near the shore. My opponent had managed to get on top of me and was now trying to strangle me. I clenched my fists and punched the man in the ears on both sides. My opponent was distracted for a moment and loosened his grip at that instant. I fumbled for the knife in his belt. I pulled it out of its sheath and hit the man several times under the ribs. His mouth opened wide in pain and slowly crawled to the side. I crawled towards the shore, spitting and gasping desperately for air. The man was no longer moving, leaving him lying there. I cautiously made my way to the house, putting my hand under my arm. I pulled out my pistol. I tried to move as quietly as possible, but I slipped on the stones and hit my foot. The pain had a sobering effect on me. I suddenly felt cold. The water dripped from my wet clothes, turning into icicles in the cold. The light in the house was on, and the door was ajar, letting out a warm smell. I looked cautiously into the living room. There was a man sitting in a wicker chair with his back to me in front of the fireplace. To his left, tied to a chair, was Inga. She shuddered several times, trying to free herself, but the ropes held her firmly in place. "Have you calmed down?" The man was still sitting with his back to me, but his voice was familiar. "What are you?" Inga's voice was breaking with rage. "Stupid, you ruined my whole life." I could hear the man smirking. "Of course you are, but you liked me, the scum. Right? That's why you didn't think twice and got into bed with me. You even got pregnant. You thought you would tie me to you." The man turned his head and I recognized him, artist of the people. "It was your father who stopped me from getting what I wanted. But I got revenge, and you didn't even understand it." The playboy poured a glass of cognac. "You want some, no, Inga?" He moaned helplessly. "So there you have it. Your baby was born alive. It was a strong and healthy girl." No. It was hard to make an arrangement with the doctor. A thick wad of bills and compromising evidence silenced him forever. The girl was taken away by a married couple. Their baby was dying and they had no choice. The money they paid me was enough. They even gave you a certificate. No, you're not lying, Inga. He tried to free himself from the ropes. I'd never seen a man scream like that. You don't have to believe it if you don't want it. I told you because you're doomed. We're done with your lover, and soon you'll join him. There's enough room on the ice for all of us. The man took a zorbo of cognac and raised his gun. I decided to act without Chinese ceremonies. "Stand up, hands on your head." "The police are working," I shouted, in the voice of a drunk, non-commissioned officer in front of the recruits. Surprised, the playboy jumped out of his chair, knocking the bottle of cognac on the table, and looked at me stunned, and the gun pointed at him, hands behind my head. "Turn around!" I kept screaming like a madman. The man obediently raised his hands and turned around quickly. I entered the room and hit him on the back of the head with the butt of the gun. Yes. Mao Deng was right. The rifle engenders power. And although I hold a pistol instead of a rifle, that doesn't change much. The essence of the old winged expression Chinese communist unleashed Inga. She looked at me with disoriented eyes, not knowing where she was. Yes. After that, a man could go crazy hearing a woman. And even more so, the mother. I forced her to drink some cognac, and I laid her down on the sofa, covering her with my jacket. I sat the limp body of the playboy in an armchair and tied his hands to the armrests. Then I undressed and hung my clothes on the chair in front of the fireplace, letting them dry for a while. I put the gun on the table to complete the image. Imagine the scene. Me sitting alone in my swimming trunks in front of an alpha male dressed a chose. I lifted the bottle. There was still cognac at the bottom and a sip directly from the neck. I looked at the playboy. His eyelids twitched several times as came to his senses. Pretending to be naive, I slapped him on the cheeks with my gun. "Uncle, stop pretending you've been staring at me for a long time." "Where is Nicholas?" asked the commissioner in a weak voice. "You're not attracted to my muscular body," I mocked. "Habitat him, your Nicholas is dead." I took another Zorbo of cognac. "You killed him, you did it. I shouldn't have done it." I laughed, drunk. "You're done, you hear, you are done." The playboy shuddered a couple of times as if he wanted to tear off the armrests. "You'll never get out of here. And alive, you'll only be shot for murder." I looked at the alpha male writhing and thought. I saw foam coming out of his mouth and smoke coming out of his fifth point. "I don't think it will go that far, if you tell me everything." I slowly got up from the table. "Who do you think you are?" The playboy shook his arms again. "If you remember, I used to be in the intelligence service. That's something we turned on. But we were trained to untie tongues." I hit him in the teeth with the handle of my gun to start. He coughed and spat out some teeth along with blood. "That's fine as an honorary alpha male. The dentist will put you new ones with a big discount." After an hour of hilarious interrogation, I knew everything, including the role of Valentina's maid. It was she who had warned the playboy that her lover was going to leave town. Inga, as a banker, was fine aware of her ex's machinations in the near future. She was going to expose all the dirt on him to the police. This provoked a quick and harsh reaction from the playboy. It's easier and cheaper to eliminate a dangerous man than to negotiate with him. My clothes had dried a little, and I got dressed. Then I took out my cell phone and called the police. It was 3:30 in the morning when a patrol car pulled up in front of the house, illuminating the area with its red and blue beacon. Accompanied by the police, we returned to the city. The confrontation lasted almost 2 days. Finally, they left us in peace, limiting us to a commitment not to leave the city. What really helped was the recording of the conversation with Inga and me that I managed to make with my cell phone. Inga did not appear at work for a week. It was scary to see her. She cried all the time. I tried to watch her, fearing that she might do something against herself. The police carried out a superficial investigation in the maternity ward, but they found no trace of the girl kidnapped. The doctor was dead. The staff had resigned or had retired a long time ago. In the end, the investigation stalled. 2 months passed after our failed trip out of the city. Inga returned to work. I stayed with her. Nothing had changed in our relationship. She treated me with cold courtesy. Nothing more than that. An examination session awaited me, and at night I looked through my textbooks one afternoon at the end of March. My son called me Dad. "Congratulations, you are about to become Grandpa. Natasa is pregnant." I couldn't hide my joy. "Yes, Dad, 4 months, and you didn't say anything until now. I was afraid of jinxing you," called your mother. My son was silent. Only a sigh could be heard on the line. "Edward, call your mom. She always loved you, maybe even more than me." I remembered the tragedy of Inga. "Listen to me call her. You are her son more than mine." "I don't believe it." "Okay, I'll do it a week later." Edward called and said he was going to come visit us. I asked the landlady TR for days off to be with my son and my daughter-in-law. "And where are they going to stay?" She asked me. Inga. "The next day, they will stay in a hotel. I don't have my own place. Why not?" Miss Chayan didn't leave. How stingy I made fun of Inga. I didn't say anything. "Invite them to my house. The house is big. There is space for everyone, at least. I will be able to talk to the young people in my old age." Inga pretended sigh. I glanced at her furtively. Inga hadn't provoked me all this time, but I knew this was just the calm before the storm, and eventually I wouldn't hold out and I would get under her blankets in the morning. I met the boys at the airport. It took us an hour and a half to get to Inga's house. "Dad, it's comfortable." Edgar was worried about living with a complete stranger. He looked at me mischievously. "Or is there something between you?" "Edward, Stop questioning, Dad. Natasha smiled. When we get there, we'll see for ourselves. I could see her face clearly in the mirror. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. This is too fantastic to be true. And if it is true, I looked at Natasha again. I stopped in front of the main door. I took her things out of the trunk and took them to the spacious hall. The boys entered the house, curious to see the rich furniture. Come, make yourselves comfortable. Inga, smiling, went down the stairs to the asphalt as before. She didn't finish speaking, but stayed looking at Natasha, convulsively clutching her hands against her chest. Oh my God. No, it can't be. It can't be my baby. My baby. Spoke softly. Inga began to fade slowly on the steps. I barely had time to catch her. Edward, help! I yelled at my son. Bewildered, we moved the woman to the couch. Grandma Maya, who had gotten up hearing the noise, brought a glass of water. Natasha stood and looked silently at Inga, then looked at me, confused. Natasha, it seems as your mother. I smiled. The young woman slowly let herself fall to the floor. What is going on here? Maishi's scared voice came from the door. What happened next? Everything is fine. Natasha suddenly turned out to be Inga's lost daughter. We don't know why the people who bought her abandoned their plans and left the girl in an orphanage. Mikey and Inga quickly took on the role of grandmothers. Natasha gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom they named Victoria. As you might have guessed, Edward forgave his mother. He and Natasha moved in with Inga, and the once gloomy house was filled with the babbling of a baby. Mishi left Chumi after a month and took my last name. Maybe she still had some hope. Inga didn't give up either. Only I didn't know all this. But to tell you the truth, I didn't want to know the fast train was taking me to the northeast of a vast country with the wheels of the train. The May sun was rising slowly over the horizon. The flowering rowan trees gave off a refreshing and spicy scent. The bird cherry blossoms fluttered slowly in the transparent air. Here they bloomed a little later than in the central belt. The petals of the bird cherry blossoms slowly turned in the air. Transparent. I walked on the spring earth. A warm breeze swayed gently the grass. The juicy poplars and young birches bathed in the gentle rays of the morning sun. I deeply inhaled the fragrance of the flowers. I was finally free. It was morning. The morning of a happy man. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, the wife once again acted in the most unpleasant way possible towards her husband. It was possible to have handled it in a more acceptable way. What is your opinion? Write in the comments until new videos.